You're listening to the top cheating audio stories. Enjoy your listening experience. I never imagined I'd be writing this, much less posting it for others to read. Even now, it feels surreal, like I'm standing outside my own life, watching it fall apart in slow motion. I guess this is what happens when everything you think you know gets pulled out from under you. My name's David. I'm 35, working as an HVAC technician in Scranton, Pennsylvania. It's a decent job, solid pay, hands-on work, nothing too exciting, but it's kept me and my family comfortable. My wife, Hannah, and I have been married for 10 years. She's 32 and stays home with our kids, Ethan, who's 8, and Megan, who's 5. They're good kids. Ethan loves baseball, Megan's obsessed with horses. Typical suburban life, really. We live in one of those quiet neighborhoods where every house looks like it was built from the same blueprint. Yards trimmed, cars washed, neighbors waving as they walk their dogs. Hannah handles most of the house stuff, running errands, dropping the kids off at school, planning meals. I take care of the heavier things, fixing whatever breaks around the house, working long hours, making sure the bills are paid on time. To anyone on the outside, we probably look like the perfect family. But on the inside, things have been different for a while. I can't remember exactly when it started, but somewhere along the line, Hannah and I began growing apart. Our conversations became short. Our bedroom routine became, well, routine, and I couldn't shake this feeling that something was missing. Still, we managed. There were no big fights or dramatic moments, just a growing distance that I kept pushing to the back of my mind, thinking it was just part of getting older, of being married for so long. Then, Ted moved back. Ted and I go way back, childhood friends. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same high school, even worked a couple of summer jobs together back in the day. He left Scranton after college and married some girl from Boston. Things didn't work out, though, and word around town was that she'd been cheating on him. He moved back in after the divorce, renting the house just down the street from us. We hadn't seen much of each other over the years, but we quickly fell back into old habits. He'd come over to catch a game, or we'd have a couple of beers in the driveway while the kids played outside. At first, it was nice having Ted around again. He was dealing with his own crap, getting back on his feet after the divorce, but I noticed something strange as the weeks went by. He started stopping by when I wasn't around. I'd come home late from work and see his truck in my driveway. He'd play it off like he was just dropping by to say hi, maybe lending a hand to Hannah with some project. He's always been a helpful guy, but it started feeling off. A little too helpful. One night, I got home around 9 after a long day at work, and there it was again, Ted's truck parked outside my house. The lights inside were off, and the house was quiet when I walked in. Hannah was in the kitchen, casually scrolling through her phone, acting like it was no big deal. "Hey, Ted dropped by earlier?" I asked, keeping my voice as casual as I could. "Yeah, he came over to help me move the old sofa into the garage." "What took you so long today?" she asked, as if nothing was unusual. "Work ran late," I replied, but something in me clicked. I brushed it off that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than just an old friend lending a hand. It wasn't long before I noticed Ted popping up more and more. He dropped by while I was at work. Then I'd catch Hannah smiling more than usual when she mentioned his name. At first, I thought it was just the old friendship vibes. But then one evening, as I was grabbing a beer from the fridge, I saw Hannah laughing at something on her phone. When I asked what was so funny, she quickly said it was just a text from Stacy, her best friend. But I saw the name. It wasn't Stacy. It was Ted. Now, I'm not the jealous type, or at least I never thought I was. But this was starting to gnaw at me. I had to know if I was being paranoid or if something was actually going on. I mean, Ted had just gone through a messy divorce, and Hannah had been distant for months. Was I connecting dots that didn't exist? Or was there more happening behind my back? And then, 2 days later, I got the message that changed everything. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was sitting on the porch, checking my phone when a new Facebook notification popped up. I opened it to see a message from a blank profile. No picture, no friends list. Just a simple, short sentence. "She's not who you think she is." It hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. Was it someone screwing with me? A joke? But something in my gut told me it wasn't. And now, everything I'd been ignoring, the glances, the laughs, the way Hannah was around Ted, It all came rushing back, louder than ever. I had to find out the truth. After I got that message, something shifted inside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had been brushing off, the late-night texts, Ted's constant presence, Hannah's strange behavior, was all connected. That Facebook message had lit a fire in me. I didn't know what I'd find, but I was sure of one thing. I couldn't sit idly by anymore. Life at home seemed normal enough, but that nagging suspicion wouldn't let up. I was still working long hours, often getting home late, covered in dust from attic work or sweat from replacing old heating systems. And every time I walked in, Hannah was glued to her phone, barely noticing I'd stepped through the door. I'd hear the occasional laugh from her while scrolling, but when I asked, she'd wave it off with, "Oh, it's just Stacy." That used to be enough of an explanation. But now, I found myself watching her every move, trying to catch the flicker of something off. The cracks in our marriage weren't obvious to anyone else, but I felt them widening every day. I'd kiss her goodbye in the mornings before heading out to work, but her eyes didn't meet mine like they used to. When we talked, it was always about the kids or logistics. Who's picking up Ethan from baseball practice? Or Megan's dance recital is next weekend, don't forget. Any intimacy between us felt forced, like we were both going through the motions of what a marriage was supposed to be, not what it used to be. And then there was Ted. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was too involved in our lives. He was over more often than seemed necessary, even when I wasn't around. One evening, I got home earlier than expected, and sure enough, Ted's truck was parked outside. I walked in quietly, and there they were, Hannah and Ted, laughing about something in the kitchen. It didn't seem like much on the surface, but the sight of them together made my stomach twist. After dinner, while Hannah was upstairs getting the kids ready for bed, I sat down at the computer. I wasn't proud of it, but I ordered a cheap surveillance camera online, one of those no-name brands that was easy to install and barely noticeable. The next weekend, I put it up outside the house, just by the garage, aimed at the driveway. If Ted's truck showed up when I wasn't around, I'd know. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, but deep down, I knew it was something darker. In the meantime, things at home grew tense. Hannah was always on her phone, and I'd see the same quick swipe to lock the screen whenever I walked into the room. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught a glimpse of her phone lighting up on the nightstand. She was in the bathroom, brushing her teeth, and I couldn't help myself. I leaned over and saw the name on the screen, Ted. The message preview was short, just the word tomorrow. I barely had time to read it before the screen went dark, and when Hannah came back into the room, she grabbed the phone immediately, locking it again. I didn't say anything right then, but it ate away at me the rest of the night. The next morning, as we were having coffee, I decided to confront her. "You've been texting Ted a lot lately, huh?" I tried to keep my voice light, like I was just making small talk, but my heart was pounding. Hannah barely looked up from her cup. "Yeah, he's been helping me with a few things around the house." "Why?" "I don't know. It just seems like you two have been talking more than usual." She raised an eyebrow, finally meeting my gaze. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know Ted's like family. He's been through a lot with the divorce, and I'm just being a friend." I hesitated, unsure of how far to push. "It's just you're always on your phone lately. I saw his name pop up last night, and it just got me wondering." Hannah set her cup down, her expression shifting from casual to defensive. "Are you checking my phone now? Is that where we are?" "Jesus, David, he's my friend and Stacy's too. You're acting like a paranoid, jealous husband." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. She was twisting this back on me, and for a moment, I wondered if I really was overreacting. But that message, "she's not who you think she is," kept ringing in my head. "I'm not checking your phone." I lied. "I just saw it light up. That's all." Hannah sighed and got up from the table. "Look, if this is about Ted, you've got nothing to worry about. He's just a friend. If you got a problem with that, maybe you need to take a good look at yourself and ask why you're so insecure." She left the room before I could respond, and I sat there, staring into my coffee, second-guessing everything. I couldn't let it go, though. That feeling in my gut was screaming at me now. So, later that day, I called Chris, my best friend. If anyone could give me some advice, it was him. We'd known each other since high school, and he wasn't the kind of guy to sugarcoat things. When Chris answered, I jumped right in. "Hey man, I need your take on something." Shoot, he said, sounding distracted. It's about Hannah and Ted. I don't know, something's off. I've noticed she's been texting him a lot, and he's been around more when I'm not home. There was a pause on the line before Chris spoke. You think something's going on? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, they've known each other forever, but something just feels wrong. I even caught a glimpse of a text from him the other night, and she locked her phone right after. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm losing it. Chris's voice dropped. You've known Ted for years, right? It's possible you're overthinking this. But then again, you're telling me you've got a gut feeling. I've been there, dude. Don't ignore that feeling. I'm not trying to accuse her without proof, I said, rubbing my forehead in frustration. But she's getting defensive every time I bring it up. Look, if your instincts are telling you something's up, trust them. But don't do anything crazy just yet. Keep your eyes open. You'll know when something's off. I thanked Chris, but even after the call, the unease gnawed at me. I needed to know the truth. That night, after Hannah had gone to bed, I grabbed her laptop. I knew her passwords. Hell, she'd given them to me for a dozen different things over the years, and I logged into her email. I felt guilty, my hand shaking slightly as I typed in the password, but I couldn't stop myself. If there was nothing there, I could put it all to rest. The inbox opened, and at first, everything looked innocent enough. Bills, subscriptions, some emails from school about the kids. I was just about to close it when I saw a name I didn't recognize. Greg. The email was short. A single line from him to her. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night. Same place? My heart dropped into my stomach. Who the hell was Greg? The cracks had become a full-on fracture, and now I had more questions than answers. The moment I saw Greg's name in that email, everything in my life shifted. It was like the ground beneath me had cracked, and I was barely hanging on by my fingertips. My mind raced, trying to piece together who this guy was, how long this had been going on, and how deep the deception ran. But I didn't confront Hannah, not yet. I knew if I acted out of anger, I'd only get half-truths, lies, or worse, she'd shut down completely. I needed more. From that point on, every moment around her felt like a lie waiting to be uncovered. Hannah's behavior was erratic, more than it had been before. Suddenly, she had a million things to do. Volunteering at the kids' school, lunches with Stacy, errands that seemed to stretch longer and longer. The excuses flowed smoothly from her, each one more casual than the last. I'm heading out to help with the bake sale at Ethan's school, she'd say, grabbing her purse without even looking at me. When are you going to be back? I'd ask, pretending not to care, my eyes glued to my phone, but secretly watching her. Not sure, she'd reply with a smile. Might grab lunch with the girls afterward. Every answer was a shade of the truth, just enough to pass as normal. But now, I wasn't so sure any of it was. I followed her one evening. It was a Wednesday. She said she had some parent-teacher meeting to attend, but she left earlier than usual. Too early for a simple school thing. I knew something was off, so I waited a bit, then grabbed my keys and followed her at a distance, keeping my headlights dim and hanging back far enough so she wouldn't catch on. I watched as she drove out of our neighborhood, taking a turn that led away from the school. My hands tightened on the steering wheel when I saw her turn into the parking lot of a Holiday Inn, a small, nondescript hotel just on the edge of town. I parked across the street, trying to calm my breathing as I watched her car come to a stop. Moments later, Greg walked out of the lobby, glancing around before opening the passenger door for her. They laughed together, and she leaned into him like it was the most natural thing in the world, the way she used to lean into me when we first started dating. They disappeared inside the hotel without a second glance. I sat there for what felt like hours, numb but angry. Every part of me wanted to burst in there, confront her, and demand an explanation. But something held me back. Maybe it was the need for proof, or maybe it was the realization that I didn't know the full extent of this yet. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos from the car. Hannah with Greg, their backs turned as they walked into the hotel. Evidence. I didn't want to confront her without knowing everything. For the next week, I kept my distance, but my mind was in overdrive. I started tracking her phone, checking every app, every message. She never left it lying around anymore, always taking it with her to the bathroom, to the kitchen like it was some prized possession. I couldn't get into her phone directly, but I found a way to mirror her text messages to my laptop without her knowing. It was an invasion of privacy, but what she was doing wasn't exactly clean either. The messages I found between her and Greg were casual at first. Then I found the more intimate ones. Photos. Plans. They were meeting once or twice a week, always at the same hotel, always under some flimsy cover story. But it wasn't just Greg. I noticed subtle mentions of other men, names I didn't recognize: Dylan, Brad, Mike. It didn't make sense at first. Then something clicked in my head. I wasn't dealing with just one affair. Hannah was living a whole other life. I didn't know how far it went, but I needed answers. I decided to confront Greg first. Confronting Hannah wasn't an option yet. She was too good at deflecting, too good at turning things around. Greg, on the other hand, didn't know me. He wouldn't see me coming. I found Greg's workplace, some small insurance office downtown. The next afternoon, during my lunch break, I walked in, my fists clenched, my heart racing. It took every ounce of control not to grab him by the collar and drag him outside. "Can I help you?" Greg asked, flashing that fake customer service smile as I stood in front of his desk. He didn't recognize me at first. Of course he didn't. I was just another faceless husband in his string of conquests. "Yeah, you can," I said, stepping closer to his desk. "You can stop sleeping with my wife." That wiped the smile off his face. His eyes widened as he realized who I was. "Listen, man, it's not what you think," he started, but I wasn't in the mood for games. "I've seen the messages, Greg. I've got photos, so spare me the excuses. You're meeting her at the Holiday Inn. You think I don't know what's going on?" He stammered, his face turning red. "It's just, look, man, it's nothing serious. It's just fun. That's all it is. Harmless fun." I leaned in, my voice low. "You call sneaking around behind my back harmless?" Greg glanced nervously around the office. I wasn't interested in making a scene yet. "Look, I didn't know you were still together like that," he muttered. She said you two were in some kind of open thing. Like, you were cool with it." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What the hell are you talking about?" Greg stood up now, hands up defensively. "She told me you knew, that you were into it, that you—" "I don't know, man. I don't want any trouble." I stepped back, trying to process what I'd just heard. Open relationship? She'd told him I was okay with this? None of this made sense. I stormed out before I did something stupid, like knocking his teeth in right there in the office. As I drove back home, my mind was racing. Had Hannah told all these guys that I knew, that I was somehow okay with it? And how many were there? I thought about Ted. Maybe he wasn't involved at all. Maybe I had been wrong about him. I didn't know who to trust anymore. I started avoiding Ted altogether, unsure if he had been dragged into this mess without knowing or if he was playing dumb. Every time we saw each other in the neighborhood, there was a tension between us that hadn't been there before. The final straw came one afternoon when I overheard Hannah and Stacy talking in the kitchen. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but as I walked down the hall, I heard Hannah's voice drop to a whisper, and something told me to stop. "You don't understand, Stace," Hannah was saying. "Greg was one thing, but now there's Brad, and Dylan's been texting nonstop. I can't keep track of it all. It's getting out of control." My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed myself against the wall, listening. "And David doesn't suspect a thing?" Stacy asked, her voice low but curious. Hannah laughed, a sound I didn't recognize. "He's clueless. He's been so caught up with work, he doesn't even realize half the time when I'm out. And Ted's just a cover. He doesn't know about the others." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Ted was a cover? So he wasn't the one she was with, but he was the distraction. And who the hell were Brad and Dylan? "It's that stupid app," Hannah continued. "It's like a whole community. There's so many guys on there. I started it just to see what it was like, but now it's gotten way more serious than I expected." I felt sick. Hannah wasn't just seeing Greg. She wasn't just sneaking around with one guy. She was part of something bigger, some online hookup community, juggling multiple men like it was some kind of game. I backed away from the kitchen, not wanting to hear any more. I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed my keys and left the house, driving aimlessly for hours, trying to wrap my head around it all. My wife wasn't just lying to me. She had created an entire secret life, one filled with men I didn't know, secrets I hadn't uncovered, and lies deeper than I ever imagined. The house I thought I knew had turned into a maze of lies, and I was just beginning to see how far they went. The more I learned, the worse it got. It wasn't just the affair with Greg or the other men Hannah mentioned in passing. The life I thought I had, a normal, predictable marriage, was slipping through my fingers faster than I could keep up. What Hannah had gotten herself into was beyond anything I could have imagined. After that conversation between her and Stacy, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I needed help. That's when I decided to hire Lori, a private investigator I'd heard about through a guy at work. She wasn't just any PI. Lori specialized in online investigations. If Hannah had created a secret life on the internet, Lori would be the one to uncover it. I met Lori at a small diner on the outskirts of town. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that told me she wasn't easily fooled. We sat at a booth near the back, away from the few other patrons, and I laid it all out for her. Everything I had discovered about Greg, the other names I'd heard, and the messages I found. I need to know how far this goes, I told her, my voice barely above a whisper. She's using some app, some kind of hookup site. There's more to this than just Greg. Lori didn't flinch. She'd probably heard worse. Give me access to whatever you've got, texts, emails, anything, and I'll start there, she said, pulling out a notepad. If she's part of something bigger, I'll find it. It didn't take long. 2 days later, Lori called me back to her office. When I walked in, she had a folder ready for me, and the look on her face told me it wasn't good. David, what I found, it's more than just an affair, she began, motioning for me to sit down. Hannah's involved in an underground community. It's a swinger group. I stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Swingers? This wasn't just casual cheating. This was something organized, planned. They operate through private forums, encrypted messaging apps. It's discreet, but not impossible to track once you know where to look, Lori continued. They meet up for, well, private sessions. It's not just one guy, David. There are several. And it's not just her. She handed me a stack of papers, screenshots of messages, photos from the forums, all linked back to Hannah. I saw her profile, one I had never seen before, using a username that meant nothing to me. But there she was, posting casually on a forum about meetups and exchanges, talking to other couples and individuals about upcoming events. I couldn't believe what I was reading. And here's something else, Lori said, flipping through the file. It looks like Ted might not be sleeping with her, but he knows about it. There are messages between them where they're talking about some of these meetups. He's aware of what she's doing, but for some reason, he's keeping quiet. I slumped back in the chair, my mind spinning. So Ted wasn't involved with her sexually, but he knew about the affairs, about the group, and said nothing. It was like being punched in the gut all over again. The guy I had trusted for years, my childhood friend, had been part of this charade. Does this mean Stacy knows too? I asked, dreading the answer. Lori sighed. That's the part that gets interesting. I dug a little deeper into Stacy's involvement. Not only does she know, but she's one of the key orchestrators. Stacy's been part of this community for years, and it looks like she's the one who introduced Hannah to it in the first place. She groomed her into it. I felt like the room was closing in on me. Stacy? The woman who came over for coffee, who watched our kids with Hannah, who sat at our table for dinner. She was the mastermind behind all of this? I have photos, David, Lori added, sliding another set of papers toward me. Messages between Stacy and Hannah, planning everything. They've been going to these sessions together. It's not just casual hookups. It's a network. The photos showed exactly what I feared. Hannah at some event, dressed provocatively, laughing with strangers. There was one picture of her and Stacy sitting by a pool, drinks in hand, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. My stomach turned. I clenched my fists, trying to keep it together. So, she's been doing this behind my back with Stacy's help. And Ted knew. Lori nodded. It looks that way. I'm sorry, David. I know this is a lot to process. But now you've got proof. Proof. That was the only word that stood out to me. I had the evidence now, but what was I going to do with it? I couldn't keep living in this house, pretending everything was fine. I had to confront her. I thanked Lori and left her office with the folder under my arm, my mind still reeling. That night, I sat in the car outside my house for over an hour, staring at the front door, trying to figure out what to say. I knew there was no easy way to do this. I had to confront her. I had to get answers. When I finally walked inside, The house was quiet. The kids were asleep, and Hannah was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, as usual. I set the folder down on the table in front of her without saying a word. She looked up confused, then down at the folder. Her face paled as she opened it, flipping through the pages. I watched her eyes widen as she took in the screenshots, the photos, the messages. "David, I can explain," she started, but I cut her off. "Explain what?" I snapped. "That you've been lying to me for months? That you're part of some underground swinger group? That you've been sleeping with God knows how many men, while I've been working my ass off to keep this family together?" Hannah's hands shook as she closed the folder. It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is, Hannah," I demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been living a double life." She broke down then, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't supposed to be like this, David. I swear. It started out, it was just something to escape the boredom. We were stuck in a routine. I felt trapped. Stacy introduced me to it, and at first it was just to see what it was like. But then, I don't know. It got out of control. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you did this because you were bored? Because our life wasn't exciting enough for you?" Hannah sobbed, wiping her eyes. "It wasn't about love. It was never about love. It was just the thrill of it. Something different. But I never meant for it to go this far." I felt my anger boiling over. "So, you dragged me into this mess? Let Ted cover for you? Let Stacy manipulate you into this?" Hannah looked down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. "Stacy, she pushed me into it. I thought I could handle it. But I was wrong." "You think," I said bitterly. I stood up, pacing the kitchen, trying to calm down. "What am I supposed to do now, Hannah? Pretend this didn't happen? You've been lying to me, cheating on me, for who knows how long." She stayed silent, her tears falling onto the folder as she sat there, broken. But I couldn't feel pity for her. Not after everything. "I need time to think," I said, walking out of the room. I needed to get away from her, from the house, from everything. I couldn't wrap my head around how the life I thought I had was nothing more than a carefully constructed web of secrets. And now I was tangled in it, trying to figure out how to escape. The web was far deeper than I imagined, and the more I pulled at the threads, the more everything started to unravel. After I walked out of that kitchen, the weight of everything started pressing down harder than ever. Divorce felt like the obvious answer, but actually following through with it, that was a whole different battle. Part of me just wanted to erase everything, pack up, and leave. The other part, the one tied to our kids, to the life we'd built, hesitated. Divorce wasn't just a word. It was a wrecking ball aimed at everything, and once it started swinging, it wouldn't stop. Lori called me the next day, checking in. "You've got enough to file," she said, her voice calm, as if she'd done this 100 times before. "You can take her for infidelity. Between the photos, the messages, and the swinger group, you'll come out with most of the assets if you push it. Especially since she's been using marital funds for these activities." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "And the kids?" Lori paused for a second. "That's always trickier. But with what I've found, you'd likely get primary custody, especially if her involvement in the group comes to light. Courts don't look kindly on parents involved in unconventional activities like that." I stayed silent for a moment, weighing her words. Divorce was starting to feel more real with every conversation, but the emotional cost was huge. How would I explain this to Ethan and Megan? How would I pick up the pieces for them? The last thing I wanted was to destroy their lives because Hannah had made these choices. But staying with her felt impossible. "I'll think about it," I finally said. "You should," Lori replied. "But don't wait too long. She could turn this around on you if you're not careful. And there's something else." "What?" "I've been keeping tabs on the group," she said, her tone shifting. "It looks like Ted and Stacy are actively recruiting new couples. They're planning some big weekend getaway in the Poconos next month. Hannah's on the invite list." My blood ran cold. So this wasn't over. Hannah had promised to stop, to quit the group, but it seemed she was already lining up her next escape. My jaw tightened as Lori continued. "They're being careful, but not careful enough. From what I've gathered, this isn't just casual anymore. It's becoming a full-blown operation. Ted and Stacy are involved in organizing, planning these trips, and bringing in new people. You need to be cautious, David. I clench my fists, trying to keep my composure. What are you saying? That this could blow up in more ways than one? Exactly. They're on the radar now. This group has drawn attention, and not the good kind. I don't have all the details, but there's chatter about coercion, maybe even non-consensual acts within the group. Law enforcement is circling. I sat up straighter, my mind racing. Wait, you mean there's an investigation? I'm not sure how deep it goes yet, but yes. I wouldn't be surprised if they come knocking soon. And with Hannah on that list, she's in deeper than she realizes. Everything in me wanted to blow the lid off this. Ted, Stacy, Hannah, they were all tangled in something much darker than I'd imagined. I thanked Lori and hung up, my mind racing with what to do next. Hannah had tried to act like she wanted to fix things. She'd said all the right things, how she was done with the group, how it had just been a mistake. But now I knew better. The weekend getaway proved it. She was still involved, still planning. Any sincerity she'd shown was hollow, just a front to keep me from digging too deep. That night, when the kids were in bed, Hannah sat across from me at the kitchen table, her face still tired from our confrontation a few nights before. I've been thinking, she said, her voice soft. I know I've made mistakes, and I'm willing to stop all of it. I'll cut off contact with the group, with Greg, with everyone. I want to fix this. I stared at her, trying to read the truth behind her words. I didn't say anything for a moment, just letting the silence settle between us. You're telling me you're done? I asked, my voice flat. That there's nothing else? Yes, she nodded. I'm done. Then why are you invited to a weekend getaway with Ted and Stacy next month? And don't lie to me, Hannah, because I know. Her face went pale. She tried to respond, but no words came out. She wasn't expecting me to know about the trip. I caught her off guard. I don't know what to say, she finally whispered, looking down at the table. I do, I said, standing up and walking toward the door. You're still lying. You're not sorry. You're just sorry you got caught. Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't care anymore. It wasn't that I didn't feel anything. I felt everything. But after everything she'd put me through, I wasn't going to be manipulated anymore. I left the room before she could say anything else. The next week passed in a blur. I barely spoke to Hannah, focusing on work and the kids. But the knowledge of that trip in the Poconos gnawed at me. Something had to be done, and I wasn't about to let her go off and make things even worse. Then, just days before I was about to confront her again, Lori called. You need to know something, she said. I've been following up on what I mentioned before. Law enforcement has started looking into the group. Some of the people involved, Stacy, Greg, are under investigation. What for? I asked, my stomach dropping. Allegations of non-consensual acts, coercion, exploitation. It's not just cheating anymore, David. It's criminal. They've been using the group as a front for other things. And Ted and Stacy are at the center of it. My head spun. I didn't know how deep this rabbit hole went, but I knew one thing. It wasn't just about my marriage anymore. Hannah was tangled in something that could destroy her, not just emotionally, but legally. Is she involved in any of that? I asked, dreading the answer. From what I can tell, no, Lori replied. But she's connected to the people who are. If this blows up, her name could get dragged into it. You need to act before it's too late. I sat down, running a hand through my hair. The thought of Hannah being caught up in a criminal investigation on top of everything else was too much. The kids, the house, everything could come crashing down. Do I go to the police? I asked, unsure of my next move. Lori paused. That's up to you. But if I were you, I'd confront her one last time. Lay it all out. She needs to know the consequences of staying involved. If she doesn't take it seriously now, it'll be too late later. That night, I waited for Hannah to come home. The tension in the air was thick as she walked through the door. I didn't waste time. Sit down, I said, pointing to the table. She froze, sensing something was wrong. What's going on? I know everything, I said, my voice steady but cold. Ted, Stacy, the group. There's an investigation, Hannah. Law enforcement. You're not in it yet, but you're close. Her face drained of color as she sat down, staring at me in disbelief. You're lying, she whispered, shaking her head. There's no way. I'm not lying. I interrupted. Lori found out. Stacy and Greg are being looked at for coercion. Exploitation. This group you've been a part of? It's not just fun and games anymore. It's criminal. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't let up. If you keep going down this road, you're going to lose everything. The kids, the house, your freedom. You've got a choice, Hannah. Walk away now, or get caught up in something you can't escape. She broke down then, sobbing in her hands, but I didn't move. I didn't comfort her. I just watched, waiting to see what she would do next. This was her last chance to prove she could take responsibility, to save whatever was left of our broken life. I didn't know how far the investigation would go, or what the fallout would be. But one thing was clear. The consequences were already here. And now, it was up to Hannah whether she'd face them or not. The next few weeks felt like I was living in someone else's life, watching it unravel in slow motion. The investigation into the swinger group wasn't just a rumor anymore. It hit hard. I hadn't told Hannah, but I had been keeping tabs on everything through Lori. When Stacy was arrested, the whole neighborhood exploded with gossip. People couldn't believe it. The friendly neighbor who always threw the best backyard barbecues and offered to help with everything from school bake sales to charity drives? Turns out, she'd been orchestrating a web of manipulation that none of us saw coming. Hannah wasn't arrested, but she was terrified. After our conversation about the investigation, she finally cut ties with everyone, Ted, Stacy, the group. She tried to act like she could patch things up between us, but the damage had already been done. Whatever trust or love we had left had disintegrated. I was just waiting for the right moment to move forward with the divorce. The more that came out about Stacy, the more I realized how deep this mess went. Ted, meanwhile, was starting to crack under the pressure. At first, I avoided him, not knowing if he'd be caught in the legal storm or if he was just an unlucky bystander. Then, one afternoon, he showed up at my door. I wasn't expecting him, and honestly, I wasn't sure what to say. "I need to talk to you," Ted said, his voice shaky. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "Can I come in?" I hesitated but stepped aside to let him in. We sat in the living room, the air heavy with tension. "I'm sorry, David," Ted started, running a hand through his hair. "I should have told you sooner, but I didn't know how. I knew about the group, about Stacy, everything. Everything." I asked, my voice flat. He nodded, looking down at the floor. "I knew what was going on. Hannah, she never told me directly, but I could see it. And Stacy, she roped me into it. I didn't participate, but I knew. I should have warned you, but I was too ashamed. I thought I could handle it, that it wasn't my business. But now, everything's falling apart." I stared at him, anger bubbling up inside me. He had known this whole time, known about the group, about Hannah's involvement, and said nothing? "You were my friend, Ted," I said quietly. "You could have stopped this before it got this far." "I know," he replied, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry, David. I screwed up. I didn't say anything," waiting for him to finish. There was something else he wasn't saying, and I could sense it. Ted shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands clasped together. "Look, I need you to keep this quiet. I'm begging you. If this gets out that I knew, I'll lose everything. My job, my reputation. I'm done for. I know I don't deserve it. But please don't tell anyone." There was desperation. "I'll make it worth your while," Ted added quickly, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you don't say anything, I'll make sure you're taken care of. Money, whatever you need. Just keep my name out of this." I stared at him, my anger boiling over. He was trying to blackmail me into silence. He had betrayed me, covered for Stacy and Hannah, and now he thought he could bribe me to protect his own skin. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I stood up, walked over to my desk, and pulled out my phone. Without a word, I hit record and let him keep talking, digging his own grave with every desperate plea. When I had what I needed, I turned to face him. "You know what, Ted? You've done enough damage. I'm not staying quiet about this. You knew exactly what was happening, and now you're trying to cover your tracks? It's too late for that." Ted's face drained of color. "David, please, you don't understand." "No." I cut him off. "I understand perfectly. And now, so will everyone else." After Ted left, I sent the recording to Lori, who forwarded it straight to the authorities. Ted's involvement, even as someone who claimed not to participate, was enough to pull him into the investigation. Within a week, the fallout hit him hard. He was questioned by the police, and his job found out about everything. Ted lost everything: his reputation, his work, his place in the community. He was ostracized, just like Stacy, though he managed to avoid jail time by cooperating with the investigation. Meanwhile, I finally sat down with a divorce lawyer. I had all the evidence I needed. Hannah's involvement in the group, her lies, her betrayal, it all worked in my favor. The lawyer explained that with everything I had on her, I could file for an uncontested divorce. I'd keep the house, get minimal alimony, and likely secure full custody of the kids. It was what I wanted, what I needed to move forward, but it still hurt like hell. I thought back to how our life used to be, how we built this family, this home. And now I was dismantling it brick by brick. But I couldn't let sentimentality stop me. Hannah had made her choices, and now I was making mine. In the final weeks leading up to the divorce being finalized, I made the decision to sell the house. There was nothing left for me in Scranton. Everywhere I went, I saw the remnants of a life that no longer existed. The neighbors still whispered about Stacy and Ted. Hannah kept to herself, knowing that her name would be next if she stayed in the group's orbit. The kids would be better off with a fresh start. Denver was my choice, far away from all this mess. I had a job lined up there already, doing HVAC work for a bigger company. More opportunities, more space, more distance. The day I signed the final divorce papers, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't the closure I expected, but it was freedom. Real freedom for the first time in years. Hannah didn't fight the terms. Maybe she knew there was no point. Maybe she was just too tired to resist anymore. I packed up what was left of our life. Ethan's baseball trophies, Megan's horse figurines, the few memories that didn't feel tainted by the last few months, and loaded them into the truck. The house sold quickly, and before I knew it, we were on the road. Standing on a ridge overlooking the mountains in Denver, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The weight of everything that had happened in Scranton seemed like a distant memory. The kids were adjusting to the new life, and for the first time, I had a sense of quiet freedom that I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't the same person I had been before all of this. The betrayal, the lies, the secrets, they had changed me, but they hadn't broken me. I knew I had done the right thing by walking away, by starting over. I took one last deep breath, letting the cold mountain air fill my lungs. It was time to move on, and with that, the past was finally behind me. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to the channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story.